During the height of World War II's strategic bombing campaign over Nazi-occupied Europe, a single B-24 Liberator becomes the subject of growing superstition among German flak crews. After surviving multiple direct hits that should have brought it down, the bomber continues to appear in formation after formation, seemingly untouchable. German gunners begin to whisper that it's the same cursed plane, one that refuses to die. As Allied bombing raids intensify, the legend of the Iron Bird spreads through German defenses, creating an almost mythical reputation for this particular aircraft that seems to mock death itself. But when a young German flak gunner finally gets a clear shot at the legendary bomber, he must decide whether to fire at what might be just another B-24, or something far more unsettling that has been haunting the skies above his homeland. The rumble began as a distant tremor, a familiar heartbeat of the approaching storm. Klaus Richter adjusted the heavy straps of his headset, the cold metal of the rangefinder digging into his brow. Around him, the flak battery was a hive of controlled tension, each man a cog in a massive, deadly machine pointed at the heavens. August 1944. The sky above the Ruhr Valley was no longer a canvas for summer clouds, but a thoroughfare for ghosts. American and British bombers, in their hundreds, made the journey almost daily, their metallic drones growing from a murmur into a deafening roar that vibrated deep in the chest. Klaus, at 22, was one of the best range operators in his unit, sharp and disciplined. He joined the Luftwaffe with a fervent belief in defending his homeland, a belief that, with each passing raid, chipped away a little more, eroded by the sheer, overwhelming volume of the enemy. He remembered the stirring propaganda films, the confident pronouncements of Reichsmarschall Göring, "No enemy bomber will ever reach the Ruhr," a promise that had long since dissolved into bitter ash and rubble. Tonight, however, felt different. A sense of foreboding, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air settled over him, a premonition of something beyond the usual carnage. "Approaching Sector Gamma 7, elevation 3000, speed 250. A voice barked over the comms, cutting through the rising din. The voice, crisp and professional, belonged to Sergeant Meyer, the unit's lead spotter, whose eyesight was rumored to be sharp enough to count rivets at 1,000 meters. Klaus's fingers danced across the dials, his eye glued to the scope. The anti-aircraft guns, massive 88mm flak guns, hulking beasts of steel, pivoted with a low, hydraulic groan, their muzzles seeking out the invisible adversaries. The smell of spent cordite from previous raids still clung faintly to the air, mingling with the damp scent of the earth. Otto Schmidt, a fellow gunner, younger than Klaus by a year or two, stood beside him, shoulders hunched, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and grim anticipation. Otto was prone to whispers, to the small furtive stories that circulated through the trenches and bunkers, tales of luck and curses, of planes that vanished and pilots that reappeared. He was the kind of man who'd seen too much, understood too little, and compensated with superstition. "They're coming thick tonight," Otto muttered, his voice barely audible above the growing engine thrum. "Heard the British hit Hamburg again, flattened half the docks. My cousin, he works on the docks there. Hasn't written in a week." His eyes were distant, haunted by phantom fires. Klaus didn't respond, his focus absolute. He could almost feel the weight of the aircraft miles above, the payload of destruction they carried. Not just bombs, but the erosion of their homeland, piece by painful piece. Then the first flashes lit up the night, blossoms of orange and red against the dark canvas as the flak guns roared to life. The concussive blasts vibrated through the earth, through Klaus's bones. A symphony of destruction played out on a grand scale. Tracers arced upwards, crimson veins reaching for the stars, searching for their metallic prey. A desperate, futile attempt to turn back the tide. Seconds stretched into an eternity of noise and chaos. Explosions rent the air, closer now, the sound of shrapnel raining down like deadly hail on the surrounding fields. The ground shook with each nearby burst, sending vibrations up through Klaus's boots. Then, through a momentary break in the smoke and fire, Klaus saw it. A B-24 Liberator, unmistakable in its silhouette, banking slightly. It was a lumbering brute, built for payload and endurance, not grace. A flying fortress of an entirely different, less elegant design than the famous B-17s. But this one, it was a wreck. One engine was clearly on fire, a black plume trailing behind it, a grotesque tale of impending doom. Its tail section looked like a shredded tin can, riddled with holes, its stabilizers practically hanging by threads. A gaping tear stretched across its starboard wing, exposing internal structures, a jagged wound that should have ensured its demise. Any other aircraft, Klaus thought, watching with a professional's cold assessment, would be spiraling towards the Earth, a fiery comet of inevitable demise, a statistic awaiting its entry in the morning report. Yet, this B-24, impossibly, held its course. It flew level, a defiant middle finger to the laws of aerodynamics. "Mein Gott," Otto whispered, his voice trembling beside him, his eyes glued to the dying bomber. "Look at it. It's just hanging there, like a scarecrow in the sky, daring us." Hauptmann Ulrich Brandt, Klaus's commanding officer, a man whose stern demeanor usually masked any emotion, cursed under his breath from his command post a few feet away. His face, usually a mask of professional calm, was etched with a flicker of disbelief. "They've taken a beating. Target it again. Concentrate fire. Don't let it escape." The guns reloaded with a mechanical clank, the breeches spitting spent casings onto the dirt. Then they fired once more, sending another volley of steel towards the crippled bomber. More explosions rocked its frame. More shrapnel tore into its already suffering skin. Klaus watched, mesmerized, as the B-24 shuddered violently, dipping a wing, its damaged frame groaning audibly even from this distance, but then, with a slow, agonizing effort, it corrected. It didn't fall. It simply continued its lumbering flight, a ghost refusing to descend, until the smoke and the sheer volume of other bombers swallowed it from view, leaving Klaus with only the lingering image of its battered defiance. "A fluke," Brandt announced, his voice regaining its usual authority, though Klaus detected a slight tremor, a forced conviction. It was just a fluke, damaged, but perhaps it had already released its payload and was turning back. The pilots likely nursed it along on a lucky trajectory. Next time, it won't be so lucky. Nothing defies gravity and physics indefinitely. But Klaus didn't believe it was a fluke. He'd seen planes hit before, seen them disintegrate with far less damage, seen pilots bail out of aircraft that looked far less severe. There was something unnerving about the sheer defiance of that particular B-24, an almost sentient refusal to die. Otto, emboldened by the sight, leaned in, his eyes wide with a manic excitement. "That's it, isn't it, Klaus? The cursed one. Old man Schmidt from Battery 3 swore he saw one like that last week. Flew right through a barrage like it was made of iron. Says it's got the devil himself in the cockpit driving it back to hell." Klaus merely shook his head, though a knot tightened in his stomach. He didn't believe in devils or curses. Such things were for the simple-minded, for those who sought easy explanations in a world of terror. But the image of that riddled B-24, holding its level flight, etched itself onto his mind, a disturbing anomaly in the meticulously calculated world of anti-aircraft warfare. It was a tiny crack in the edifice of certainty, and a flicker of unease began to grow into something more substantial within him, a seed of doubt that would soon bloom into a full-blown obsession. The weeks that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of alerts, raids, and the deafening roar of the flak guns. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the air attacks seemed to grow only more frequent and precise. The Allied air forces, it seemed, were testing the very limits of German endurance, both physical and psychological. Then it reappeared. Not just a B-24, but that B-24. Klaus first recognized it not by its serial number, which would have been impossible to discern at altitude and speed, but by its distinctive damage, its unique battle scars. The ragged tear on the starboard wing was still there, a jagged bite mark, now crudely patched over with what looked like a lighter shade of metal, but visible nonetheless under the glare of searchlights. A new rectangular patch covered a section of the fuselage near the bomb bay, slightly off color, standing out against the dulled olive drab. It was the same ghost, making its rounds, a recurring nightmare against the moonlit sky. "Sector Charlie 4, closing fast. Heavy formation, 50+. Again, the guns roared. The sky erupted in fire, a chaotic ballet of destruction. And again, the B-24 seemed to attract a disproportionate amount of punishment. Klaus watched through his scope as shell after shell burst around it, shrapnel tearing into its already scarred frame. A new fire bloomed briefly near an engine, spitting embers into the night, then flickered out, leaving only more black smoke like a wounded animal refusing to bleed out. Yet it continued, a steady, unwavering presence among the formations, its broken wings somehow still beating against the odds. It seemed to sway, perhaps from the wind or the internal strain on its crippled frame, but it never lost its altitude, never faltered in its trajectory, a defiant automaton. Otto, now an apostle of the cursed plane, pointed wildly, his voice hoarse from shouting over the din. "There, see, Klaus, the iron bird. It flies like it's mocking us. They say it laughs at our shells. It's come back for more." His eyes glittered with a morbid fascination. Brandt, observing from his post, slammed his fist on a nearby console, the metallic clang lost in the explosions. "Damn it, how does it do it? Every report from ground spotters confirms heavy damage. It should be down. My men are losing heart, Hauptmann. This defies every principle of air combat and structural integrity." His voice was laced with a frustration that Klaus had not heard before, a genuine bafflement that bordered on desperation. The logical, experienced officer, a veteran of campaigns from Poland to Russia, was being confronted with an inexplicable phenomenon, and it grated on him, eroding his professional composure. The rumors intensified, filtering through the ranks, spreading like a contagion. Soldiers from other batteries shared stories, each one more incredible than the last. The B-24 with the missing rudder that somehow landed safely behind enemy lines. The one that returned to England with hundreds of bullet holes, its crew unharmed, stepping out as if from a mere training flight. The plane that seemed to absorb flak like a sponge, spitting it back as sheer defiance. Soon, the bomber Klaus had seen became known simply as the Iron Bird, a testament to its perceived invincibility, a symbol of the frustrating, almost supernatural defiance of the enemy. It was becoming less an aircraft, more a malevolent spirit. Klaus, in his downtime, found himself sketching, not the glorious Messerschmitts or the sleek Focke-Wulfs he had once admired, symbols of German engineering prowess, but the ungainly shape of the B-24, meticulously drawing in the recurring damage, the new patches, trying to find a pattern, a weakness. He tried to understand its structural integrity, the aerodynamics of a half-destroyed wing. He reread manuals, studied diagrams of its internal construction, devoured every piece of intelligence on B-24 vulnerabilities. He needed to find a logical explanation, a scientific reason for what he was witnessing. The thought of a cursed plane, a supernatural entity, was unsettling, a challenge to everything he understood about war and reality, a direct affront to the German analytical mind. Yet, the persistent image of the damaged but unyielding bomber began to wear on him, gnawing at the edges of his rational mind. He found himself restless, often waking in a cold sweat, the phantom roar of bomber engines echoing in his ears, a mechanical drone that followed him even into sleep. The frustration wasn't confined to the flak batteries, nor was it merely a local morale problem. It had reached the highest echelons of German command, a point of genuine strategic concern. Oberst Hermann Voss, a man whose uniform always seemed perfectly pressed, whose gaze was as sharp as the crease in his trousers, arrived at their sector one damp morning. He was notorious for his intolerance of failure and his rigid belief in strict adherence to military doctrine, particularly the doctrine of overwhelming force and precise execution. To him, an anomaly like the Iron Bird was an embarrassment, a stain on the Luftwaffe's record. Brandt stood rigidly at attention as Voss paced their command bunker, a stack of reports in his hand. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, reflecting a mind that abhorred disorder. Hauptmann Brandt, these reports are unacceptable. For weeks, one specific enemy aircraft, designated Liberator 496 by intelligence, a B-24 as you know, has repeatedly penetrated our air defenses, sustained crippling damage, and returned to base. This is not merely a tactical failure. It is a morale failure. Rumors of its invincibility are spreading like wildfire, not just among the troops, but even among the civilian population. It is becoming a symbol, Hauptmann, a symbol of our inability to stop them. It is inspiring the enemy and demoralizing our own people. Such legends sow doubt, and doubt is a far more insidious enemy than any bomb. Voss slapped the reports onto Brant's desk with a sharp crack that echoed in the bunker. This iron bird, as your men so poetically call it, must be destroyed. Immediately. What is your plan? Tell me, Hauptmann, are you attempting to capture it for display, perhaps in a museum of Allied tenacity? His tone was laced with sarcasm that cut deeper than any reprimand. Brant, usually unflappable, hesitated. Sir, we have targeted it repeatedly. We have increased our fire concentration. Its structural integrity seems abnormal. We've even employed fighter intercepts, but its formation flying, even when damaged, makes it difficult to single out. Abnormal? Voss scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. There is nothing abnormal in war, Hauptmann, only superior and inferior tactics, and superior or inferior resolve. This Liberator flies on physics, not magic. It is a machine, a collection of metal and wires, subject to the same stresses as any other. You will devise a strategy, a specific strategy, to bring it down. Consider it a priority above all other targets. Failure to do so will be viewed as a catastrophic dereliction of duty. As Voss continued to harangue Brant, demanding tactical reports and proposed solutions, Klaus, who had been listening from a respectful distance, felt a sudden surge of something akin to insight, a cold, calculated plan forming in his mind. He stepped forward, saluting crisply, his gaze steady. Hauptmann, Oberst, if I may. I believe I have observed certain patterns in Liberator 496's flight path, its preferred entry and exit vectors, and crucially, how it handles under various levels of damage. My analysis suggests a predictable response to heavy hits. Brant looked surprised, not expecting the young Gefreiter to interject, but Voss raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. And what precisely have your observations yielded, Gefreiter? Sir, the bomber often attempts to maintain a steady course, even when hit, rather than immediately swerving or diving. This suggests a crew that prioritizes stability, perhaps to protect the bombardier during a bomb run, or to allow for a more controlled return to their base. It's an ingrained behavior. If we could anticipate its most likely post-damage corrections, and create a concentrated kill zone along that vector, a corridor of overwhelming fire, we could ensure its destruction. We hit it where it's most likely to be vulnerable, and where it's most likely to attempt to recover its flight. Brant, though still skeptical of such a granular approach, saw a glimmer of hope in Klaus's methodical explanation. He had witnessed Klaus's meticulous work firsthand. He has been tracking it rigorously, sir. His sketches are quite detailed, his notes precise. He even logs wind drift and shell trajectory adjustments. He has a mind for this. Voss leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, assessing Klaus with the calculating gaze of a predator. A new approach. Good, very good, Richter. Brant, implement this man's strategy. I want that iron bird scattered across the countryside by the end of the week. Failure is not an option, Hauptmann. Success, however, will be noted. Klaus felt a new kind of pressure, a heavier burden than the routine threats from above. It wasn't just from the enemy anymore, it was from his own side, from the weight of expectation. He wasn't just observing anymore, he was actively hunting. The Iron Bird was no longer just a legend, it was his personal adversary, a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to his very understanding of reality. The line between duty and obsession blurred a little further, then a little more. The hunt consumed Klaus. He meticulously charted every possible trajectory, every wind condition, every defensive maneuver the B-24 had ever made, or failed to make. His bunker cot was littered with maps, aerial photographs, and his own detailed sketches of the Iron Bird, each new patch and scar added with a precise pencil stroke, like a cartographer mapping an unknown land. He ate little, slept less, his mind a maelstrom of calculations, angles, and hypothetical scenarios. The smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke became his constant companion. His comrades noticed. Otto, now even more convinced of the bomber's supernatural nature, would watch Klaus with a mixture of awe and pity. "You're getting too close, Klaus," he'd warned one night, his voice hushed, eyes darting nervously. "That thing, it changes people. It's got something dark in it, a malevolent spirit. You can see it in your eyes, the way you're always staring at those maps, muttering to yourself. Otto was right. Klaus felt a change, a cold, focused intensity that pushed everything else aside. He rarely spoke of anything else. Brandt, while appreciating Klaus's dedication, began to express genuine concern, the professional detachment fading. "Richter, you look exhausted. You're bordering on physical collapse. A tired mind makes mistakes, and in our line of work, mistakes cost lives. Take some leave. A few days away from the guns, a good meal, some sleep." But Klaus refused, his voice hollow, his eyes haunted. "Not until it's down, Hauptmann. Not until it's gone. I understand its patterns now, I feel it. I know what it will do." It was a strange statement, almost mystical, coming from the usually pragmatic Klaus. He'd begun to have vivid dreams, not of bombs exploding or guns firing, but of the B-24 itself, flying silently, inexorably, its damaged frame a stark shadow against a blood-red sky, always just out of reach. He saw flashes of movement in its cockpit, a stoic face, a defiant gesture, a direct challenge. He wasn't just a gunner anymore. He was in a personal duel with the crew of that bomber, a duel of wills stretching across the vast empty canvas of the sky. He felt a connection to it, an understanding that transcended mere target acquisition. One particularly heavy raid, Klaus's strategy was put to its first major test. He directed his gunners with an almost preternatural calm, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, despite the ground shaking beneath them. "Elevate 10 degrees, lead by 2 seconds, fire." The precision of his commands was absolute, honed by countless hours of observation. The guns roared. Tracers converged, a terrifying funnel of light and steel. Klaus held his breath as the bursts blossomed right around the familiar B-24, closer than ever before, enveloping it in a deadly embrace. For a horrifying, exhilarating moment, he thought they had it. The bomber lurched violently, its nose dipping sharply, a huge section of its tail fin tearing away completely, spiraling into the night. He saw sparks, heard the crackle of a new, larger fire erupting from what looked like its number 3 engine, turning it into a miniature sun. This is it, he thought, a grim satisfaction mingled with a strange sorrow. The hunt was over, but then, impossibly, the B-24 fought back. It didn't spin, didn't break up, didn't plummet. It leveled off, albeit with a distinct wobble, its remaining engines roaring in defiant struggle, pushing the crippled airframe against all logic. It was a staggering sight, a testament to sheer, brute force of will. Klaus squinted through the smoke. He could have sworn he saw a dark shape in the cockpit, silhouetted against the burning horizon, make a quick, almost insolent motion, as if waving a dismissal, a final taunt. The bomber, battered beyond belief but unbeaten, continued its slow, painful retreat into the night, disappearing once more beyond the range of their guns. Klaus stumbled away from the rangefinder, his legs weak, his body trembling. He felt a profound weariness, a mix of awe and terror. He had hit it, scored a fatal blow by all rights, yet it had flown away. How? What kind of men flew such a machine? What kind of machine could endure such punishment? Otto, mouth agape, looked at Klaus, his eyes wide and vacant. "It's not natural, Klaus, I told you. It's not natural. It's mocking us. It's a demon." The radio static crackled. Then a clipped, accented voice, clear despite the interference, cut through the air in the operations bunker. "Liberator 496, call sign Lindy's Liberator, returning to base. Significant damage. 1 engine out. Tail section compromised. Crew status green, repeat crew status green. Request immediate priority landing and damage assessment." Brandt, who had been listening to the intercepted Allied broadcast with a look of growing despair, slammed his hand on the table. "They call it Lindy's Liberator. The Americans. Not just the aircraft, but the men who fly it. It's piloted by a Captain Lindstrom. Robert Lindstrom. He's known for his persistence." Klaus listened, a grim realization dawning. So it wasn't just the machine. It was the man. The ghost in the cockpit, the flash of defiance he'd imagined. It was a real person. A man with a name and a crew. A man who refused to die, who embodied the stubborn will of his nation. German intelligence reports later passed down to them in a classified briefing spoke of Lucky Lindy, a pilot who had cheated death countless times, returning battered B-24s when all hope seemed lost. These reports, usually clinical and detached, even noted a certain respect for his audacity. Lindstrom, they noted, was known for unconventional flying techniques when damaged, often using the plane's inherent stability to compensate for lost control surfaces, pushing its design limits. His crew was meticulously trained in emergency repairs and damage control, capable of patching serious wounds mid-flight. The legend was not entirely of German making, but a mirror reflecting Allied resilience, a testament to their industrial capacity and their sheer human tenacity. The reports also hinted at a broader, almost incomprehensible American approach to logistics and materiel. They mentioned the concept of redundancy, of overwhelming numbers, of the sheer volume of production that allowed them to replace damaged aircraft and crews with astonishing speed. It wasn't about conserving, it was about overwhelming. This clashed directly with the German military's deeply ingrained doctrine of efficiency, conservation, and meticulous planning, where every piece of equipment was precious and irreplaceable. Klaus remembered the logistical nightmare the Wehrmacht faced in Russia, their advances grinding to a halt because supplies couldn't keep pace. The Americans, it seemed, had no such concept of cannot. The pressure from Oberst Voss was now unbearable. Another meeting. Another scathing reprimand for Brandt and his unit. Hauptmann, I am tired of this charade. This Lindy's Liberator is a cancer, a festering wound on our air defense. It feeds Allied morale, emboldening their bomber crews, and it erodes ours, making our soldiers believe in enemy superstitions. I am authorizing a specific pre-planned ambush, a final decisive operation. We will lure it into a designated kill zone, supported by every available flak unit and fighter interceptor from 3 adjacent sectors. There will be no escape. Richter, your detailed knowledge of its flight characteristics, your feeling for its movements, will be critical. Your plan will be the core of this operation. Klaus nodded, his face gaunt, the dark circles under his eyes prominent. He felt a strange combination of dread and exhilaration. This was it, the final confrontation. He knew that for him personally, this went beyond mere military orders, beyond duty. He needed to bring it down, not out of hatred, but out of a desperate need for answers, for closure, to prove that logic and human effort could still prevail against a seemingly impossible adversary, against the unsettling specter of the Iron Bird. The planning was meticulous, grim, almost sacred. They established a new, heavily fortified sector, camouflaging additional flak guns, and arranging for a squadron of Me-109 fighters to be on standby, ready to intercept any other bombers that might provide cover. The bait was a critical German industrial target, a synthetic fuel plant on the outskirts of the Ruhr, one they knew the Allies would hit hard, repeatedly. They waited, silent, tense, for days. The atmosphere in the bunker was thick with anticipation, the air charged with unspoken dread. Otto sat in a corner, nervously cleaning his rifle, muttering prayers under his breath. He clutched a small wooden cross, his knuckles white. "If it comes, Klaus," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I just hope it's quick. For us. For them." Klaus said nothing, but his hands, as he checked his equipment for the 100th time, trembled slightly. He wasn't just shooting at a plane anymore. He was fighting a myth, and a part of him was terrified he might lose. The air raid siren began its mournful wail precisely at 14 hours, a chilling, rising shriek that tore through the quiet afternoon. The ground vibrated, a low tremor that intensified into a monstrous roar, as the first formations appeared on the horizon, tiny specks growing rapidly into menacing silver shapes. This was it. Klaus knew it. He felt it in his bones, a cold certainty. "Targets inbound, Sector Omega 9. Heavy formation, 50+ bombers," the comms officer shouted, his voice cracking with tension. Klaus was at his station, his vision narrowed to the circular scope, his mind clear, focused. He could hear the frantic reports from other batteries, the rising crescendo of anti-aircraft fire from the surrounding sectors. a cacophony of incoming destruction and outgoing defiance. Then, a new report, spoken with an almost reverent dread. Liberator 496 detected lead element heading for primary target. Speed and altitude nominal. Bearing 090. A chill ran down Klaus's spine, not of fear, but of an intense, cold anticipation. It was there. It had taken the bait. Now, the trap. Brandt's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the comms, echoing in every headset. All units, hold fire until designated. Maintain silence. Richter, your call. Your target. Your moment. Klaus's breath hitched, a knot tightening in his stomach. He tracked the lead bomber, its outline slowly resolving in his scope, its familiar, defiant shape becoming clearer. It was there. The distinctive patchwork of repairs, the slightly ragged tail, the subtle but unmistakable silhouette. The Iron Bird. Its very presence seemed to suck the air out of the bunker. Targeting data locked, Klaus announced, his voice surprisingly steady, a calm amidst the internal storm. Lead by 5 seconds. Elevate 3.2. Fire on my mark. All batteries, focus fire on Liberator 496, no deviations. This is our priority. He waited, agonizing seconds, for the bomber to enter the precise kill zone they had calculated, the invisible crosshairs of their combined artillery. The air thrummed with a terrifying stillness, all the guns poised, their muzzles aimed like hungry metallic jaws. Mark. 100 guns roared in unison, a single thunderous blast that ripped through the air, shaking the very foundations of the bunker. Tracers, a veritable wall of fire, streaked upwards, converging on the B-24, a terrifying, incandescent spear. Klaus watched, his eye glued to the scope as the barrage slammed into the B-24. It was like watching a ghost finally being struck by lightning, a phantom made tangible only in its destruction. The bomber reeled. Explosions erupted across its fuselage, tearing metal, ripping open its already scarred skin, revealing its skeletal structure. One engine exploded with a flash of orange, then another, sending debris spinning into the air. The B-24 dipped violently, spiraling this time, fire streaming from its wings, its tail section disintegrating, detaching completely in a slow-motion dance of death. It began to fall. A fiery, broken swan song, a monument to defiance finally undone. "It's going down! It's going down!" Otto shrieked, a mix of relief and terror, of vindication and horror in his voice. "We got it, Klaus! We got the Iron Bird!" Klaus watched the descent, a profound and complex wave of emotions washing over him. Triumph, yes. A cold, hard validation of his tireless calculations, his obsessive hunt, but also a strange, hollow sadness, an unexpected sense of loss. It wasn't just a machine. It had been something more, a symbol that had consumed his thoughts, his dreams. He saw the black smoke, the spreading flames, the inevitable arc towards the earth, a funeral pyre against the twilight sky. He felt no elation, only an immense weariness, a profound emptiness. The legend was broken, but at what cost to his own soul? A part of him, a part that had grappled with the impossible, had died with it. The crash site was a muddy, churned-up field several kilometers from the battery, pockmarked with craters from previous raids. The air hung heavy with the acrid smell of burnt fuel and scorched earth, a grim perfume of death. German ground troops were already there, securing the perimeter, their faces grim in the flickering light of the smoldering wreckage, rifles held at the ready. Klaus's flak battery was ordered to the site, ostensibly for reconnaissance and to confirm the kill. But Klaus suspected Voss wanted them to see the tangible proof, to dispel any lingering doubt about the cursed plane, to break the psychological grip it had held. Otto walked beside Klaus, his face pale, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a quiet awe. "So it was just a plane," he whispered, almost disappointed, as if a great mystery had been reduced to mundane reality. No magic, no demons. Klaus didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the mangled remains. The B-24 lay broken, its wings detached at odd angles, its fuselage ripped open, a grotesque monument to its own destruction. It looked like a child's toy, savagely torn apart. Brandt moved with efficiency, directing his men. taking notes, a professional pathologist at the scene of a death. He looked at Klaus, a silent acknowledgement of the success of his strategy, a nod that conveyed both respect and a shared exhaustion. As they approached the main wreckage, Klaus began to see it. Not magic, but something far more profound, far more unsettling in its human implications. He walked through the debris, past scattered munitions, twisted aluminum, and pieces of personal gear, a half-eaten chocolate bar, a deck of cards, a tattered magazine, and then he saw the repairs. The jagged tear on the starboard wing, the one he had sketched countless times, was there. But beneath the scorched paint, he could see the patchwork. Not precise factory-level repairs, but rough, almost desperate mends. Sheets of aluminum, clearly scavenged from other wrecks or supply crates, riveted haphazardly over gaping holes. Some patches were even crudely hammered pieces of steel, riveted on with a brute force that screamed of urgency, not finesse. It was like a Frankenstein's monster of an aircraft, held together by sheer will. He knelt by a section of the fuselage near the bomb bay, where one of his earlier shots had landed. Bullet holes, hundreds of them, peppered the metal like a forgotten target practice. Many were surrounded by quick, almost surgical patches, some barely larger than a coin, held in place by what looked like sealant or hastily applied tape. They weren't perfect, wouldn't hold up in a storm, wouldn't pass any German inspection, but they were enough to keep the pressurized cabin intact, to keep the wind from tearing the skin off. He saw evidence of multiple layers of patches over patches, a history of combat written in metal. Inside the cockpit, amidst the twisted metal and shattered glass, Klaus saw the crude ingenuity. An entire section of instrument panel looked like it had been salvaged from another B-24, grafted onto the existing frame with visible welds. Wires were haphazardly taped together, some showing signs of melting and retaping, bypassed circuits running alongside dead ones. An engine housing, ripped open, revealed evidence of internal repairs. A broken fuel line secured with what looked like a leather strap, a cracked manifold reinforced with a metal brace. It was a testament to improvisation, not invincibility. A story of men refusing to be beaten by a machine's limitations. He found a pilot's logbook, its pages scorched but miraculously legible. Inside, scrawled entries documented dozens of missions, each one listing battle damage, repairs, and the names of mechanics. And there, on the first page, almost defiantly, was a small hand-drawn insignia, a winged skull with a halo, and beneath it, in English script, Lucky Lindy. A small, faded photograph, creased and stained but clearly cherished, of a woman and two small children, was tied with string to what remained of the pilot's control yoke. It wasn't a symbol of a curse, or a supernatural charm, or some dark magic. It was a reason to fight, to survive, to keep flying no matter the odds, to get home to those faces. Klaus's realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked around at the wreckage, the sheer, relentless will to live and complete a mission, embodied in every makeshift repair, every improvised fix. The Iron Bird wasn't cursed. It was a monument to human determination, to the desperate ingenuity of a crew driven by an unyielding spirit. It was the collective will of a few men, led by Captain Lindstrom, refusing to give up, pushing their machine and themselves beyond what seemed physically possible, day after day, raid after raid. It was not a ghost. It was a testament. Brandt's report to Oberst Voss was stark, devoid of the usual military jargon or inflated rhetoric. Sir, the B-24 Liberator, call sign Lindy's Liberator, has been successfully destroyed. However, the examination of the wreckage reveals extraordinary circumstances. The aircraft was not cursed, nor did it possess any abnormal structural properties beyond its original specifications. Its remarkable resilience was due to an unprecedented level of field improvisation and continuous, desperate repairs by its ground crews and its flight crew. It was a patchwork of salvaged parts, hastily applied patches, and jury-rigged systems. The extent of the battle damage it had sustained, and its continued operational status, defies standard engineering expectations. The crew maintained a damaged aircraft through sheer ingenuity and a refusal to acknowledge that it should have failed. Voss listened, his face impassive at first. Then slowly, a look of grim realization, almost despair, spread across it, erasing the usual rigidity. "So, not a superior aircraft, Hauptmann," he mused, his voice unusually quiet, "but a superior tenacity, a sheer refusal to acknowledge defeat, a boundless capacity for improvisation that we do not account for in our doctrine." He looked out the window, at the sky that had once been their bastion, now merely a vast arena for a new kind of warfare. This explains much, far more than any talk of curses. Klaus felt a strange sense of clarity, a profound, almost spiritual understanding. The fear that had plagued him, the unsettling belief in something beyond his comprehension, had dissipated like the smoke from the wreckage. In its place was a profound, almost humbling respect for the men who had flown that plane. They were not devils, not ghosts. They were simply men, driven by a powerful will to survive, using ingenuity and sheer stubbornness to overcome impossible odds. They were, in a terrifying way, just like him. Otto, looking at the grim faces of his superiors, still seemed a little lost. A boy whose fairy tale had been abruptly snatched away. "So, no curse, then?" he asked Klaus later, as they walked back to their bunks, the cold wind whipping across the field. Klaus shook his head, a faint melancholic smile touching his lips. "No, Otto, no curse, just human beings, fighting to stay alive, fighting to get home, like us. Only, they fight with an endless supply of patches and spares, and a will that refuses to break." He looked up at the vast, indifferent sky, no longer seeing ghosts or supernatural entities, but the stark reality of the human condition in war. The Iron Bird was gone, its legend shattered, but its truth remained. The truth behind it, the raw, unyielding will of human beings in conflict, the boundless capacity for improvisation, and the sheer, bloody-minded refusal to surrender, that truth would remain, etched into the memory of Klaus Richter, a testament more powerful than any myth. He thought of the photograph tied to the yoke, the children's faces. It was never about a curse, but about a promise. And in that moment, Klaus saw not just an enemy, but a reflection of humanity itself, a mirror held up to the brutal, relentless nature of modern war. The German generals had laughed at the reports of American logistics, their belief in industrial might over military prowess. They had assumed the enemy would follow European precedent, conserve resources, act cautiously. But the Iron Bird had been a harbinger, an early, stark lesson. It was not elegant or efficient by German standards, but it worked. And in working, it had exposed a fundamental difference in how this war was being fought, a difference that would ultimately prove decisive. Klaus, one young gunner in a sea of millions, now understood. The legend of the Iron Bird was not about a single plane or a single crew. It was about an entire way of waging war. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history and psychology of wartime legends, please consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you.